I was worried about you, humble thinker. You used to be here first all the time, and then you had a dry spell. But now you're back. 1,000 Pine Points to you. Not looking forward to sharing a bed with you at the luxurious Tropicana Casino and Spa. I'm praying that the COVID will still be around by that time. I'm kidding. It's a joke. This is a debate between Aron Ra and Eric Hernandez. And I thought it was interesting. And I'm going to give my thoughts on it and maybe some hints for both anybody who debates Eric Hernandez in the future. Some pointers how I would do it. And also what I'm a steel man. I'm often people say I don't steel man theists and Christians, and you gotta. I'll be honest, and I'll give Eric Hernandez some hints and some tips of how he can be better. Be a better defender for Christianity. 1 Peter 3:15. Welcome. I know it's late for some people. Let's see here. Greg Vandenberg. I love that name. Wow, I made it right at the beginning. Yeah, you did. It's a miracle. It's a PineCreek miracle. I'm not going to play all this. I'm going to try to keep this shorter, like down to an hour. But I want to show you some of these slides here. So I'm not going to play what Eric actually says, but the link is in the description so you can hear for yourself. But look how Eric set this debate up. Is that big enough? Maybe I'll make that a little bigger and me a little smaller or off to the side. Two things this debate is not. This debate is not about religion, how people in the past may have come to believe in the soul. Why does he say that, I wonder? What people didn't know what air was doesn't apply and is relevant. My guess is he said this because maybe he's heard Aron Ra say things in the past about that. I don't know. This debate is not a scientific question. This one is really interesting to me because of this. If it's not a scientific question, why is the word body in his definition of soul, which we'll see coming up in one of his slides? Like, a body is something you can test empirically, is it not? So isn't at least part of what a soul is a scientific question? This is, I think, the weakness in one of the major weaknesses in Eric Hernandez's presentation is the definition of a soul. A soul is an immaterial substance. What does immaterial mean? And Aron Ra asked that question. That contains consciousness. Now that, in my opinion, is sloppy. Because look, you got an equal sign there. An equal sign. A soul equals like a mathematical equation, an immaterial substance, and we're not sure what that means. And it contains consciousness. It isn't consciousness, but it contains it, and animates the body. Now, if you read this definition, it almost makes it sound like if you don't have a body, you can't have a soul, does it not? Now, I'm sure Eric would not say that, but the way he's defined soul here, it really looks like that's what it is. That if you don't have consciousness, you don't have a soul. If you don't have this immaterial substance, you don't have a soul. And if you don't have a body, you don't have a soul. It almost makes it sound like, well, he uses the word and. So I think that's a major problem, and I think it's going to come back to bite him later on in this debate. What's his next slide? Yeah, he talks about physicalism, that the mind, that guys like Aron Ra will say the mind equals the brain. And he's saying that's not true. But I could say, does the soul equal consciousness? I think I can put that does not equal sign in there as well, based on his definition. We'll talk more about that later. Then he talks about, he loves the guitar analogy. Gives some quotes. The indivisibility of personhood. Yeah, see, this is the thing. Why are Christians using this argument? Things like consciousness, even personhood, what makes a person, even what makes life, these are not easy questions. These are very, very difficult questions, no matter who you are. And I can't help but think that, I know Christians are going to disagree with me here, and especially Eric, but it really sounds to me like you can't explain X, or this is so complicated or so miraculous in a way that there just has to be this immaterial stuff called a soul. It's just, what else would explain this? And to me, that just sounds like an argument from ignorance. It's like, I can't explain this, so therefore, he wouldn't say God, but, well, at least not in this debate, but at least immaterial. Let's see. Then he talks about cause or dependence does not equal identity. Oh yeah, okay, this is his major, if I was to summarize his whole argument, which he has many parts of the argument, but I think it's this. It's that, this principle of non-identity. If the brain is not equal to, not perfectly identical to consciousness, then that means that there's more to consciousness than purely physical, because the brain is purely physical. But I think that argument can come back to bite him, because can we not say, using this law of identity or non-identity that shows that consciousness doesn't exist as purely immaterial as well? Is the soul exactly the same as consciousness? And if not, then we can't say that it's purely immaterial for the same reason he says that consciousness is not purely material. Okay, so my advice when debating or talking about this topic with a theist is take the questions they ask you and just flip it right back on them. And I know Christians hate this, but if I was to be asked, do I believe in the soul? I would say, well, probably not. I'm open to the idea. I'm open that there's this immaterial something. But my real question is, well, how in the world would I test it? How would I know that I'm not just fooling myself here and that this is actually real, that this is true? Because Christians love truth, right? How do we know this is actually true? How do I raise my confidence that this is true? So I would take the questions that they're asking, ask it back, admit that they could be right, admit that there could be this immaterial something that causes consciousness, but then ask them right back, are you open to the idea that consciousness, whatever that is purely material? Are you open to that idea? And I really don't think Eric Hernandez is open to that idea. And when you're in a debate situation and there's people on one side and the other, but some people would be in the middle, sort of, open to hearing both sides out. When they hear you being open to the immaterial, but the other side not being open to the purely physical, it's like, well, wait a minute here. Who's actually valuing truth more? Because if it's true that the consciousness is purely material, I think for Eric anyhow, because this is, I think, his favorite argument, I think it's over for him as far as showing that Christianity is true. And that's another thing. Why is he doing this? I think the real reason he's coming up with these arguments is either to build the confidence in people who already believe, number one, and number two is to evangelize. Is it not? Like, to say, well, if someone can be open to the idea and say, yeah, there's this immaterial something, maybe there's a supernatural realm, whatever that means. And if there's a supernatural realm, then maybe there's a God. And if there's a God, then he can do miracles like raise Jesus from the dead. I really think this is where it all leads and why he uses arguments like this. But really, I've known a lot of Christians in my life, and I don't think I've ever met a Christian who became a Christian because of the argument from consciousness. And I know Christians hate me when I say this, but I think they use this argument mostly not to feel stupid for what they believe and to build the confidence within themselves. Okay, I is greater than a brain and the body. I am a soul. See, even this is interesting. This slide says that the I, the ego, the self, is more than just the brain and the body. But yet in his definition of soul, I'll put it down here. The body is involved with this. So it's like you have to have a body, it sounds like, in order to have a soul. In fact, don't most Christians say that what causes a soul is when the sperm and the egg meet and life the soul begins at conception. So there's something going on here. The soul is dependent on this material stuff, it seems like, called the body. Okay, so let's listen to. I'm just going to play the questions, and they're tough. There really are tough questions that he asked Aron Ra, but I just want you to see what it sounds like when you ask these same questions back at him.
Thanks. So you're saying that consciousness is generated by the brain, is that right?
Not just by the brain. That consciousness consciousness exists below the brain. It's just when you have a brain, you have more.
Hey, thank you, Kent Hoven CPA, for the donation. Here's $2 because I love Canadians except for Psi 9. Okay, what Eric asks is consciousness generated by the brain? And I would just ask right back, is consciousness generated by the soul? If so, how? Now, it seems like a lot of times Christians like Eric will want to know, or not always, but sometimes want to know, well, how can consciousness come from the brain? Explain that to me, you dirty atheists. But at the same time, I don't think a Christian could explain how the soul can generate consciousness. What's the exact mechanism of that? It's a question that's screaming for explanation. But I think all the Christian can say is it just does. The soul just does. They can't come up with any mechanism. Okay, I'm going to fast forward to another question. Eric goes into pain because he really wants to bring out this idea of qualia.
No, because I didn't answer the question. Is pain in the brain? Is a thought in the brain?
So is pain in the brain? Is thought in the brain? And I would just ask that question right back. Is pain in the soul? Is a thought in the soul? And I think Eric would say yes here, but I'm not sure. I think according to his definition, that if the soul contains consciousness, then a thought is actually in the soul. But where is the soul?
Once again, since we have this is being evident in organisms that don't have a brain, then no, it's not just in the brain.
Actually, I didn't know this. Well, maybe I did. But basically, Aron Ra is saying that there's lower forms of consciousness that doesn't even require a brain. And I think Eric loved that comment because he says, oh, so you don't need a mind, a brain, or a body even. Well, no, he wouldn't go that far, but a mind to house consciousness. So saying that God is a disembodied mind.
Though in us, it centralizes in the brain. In organisms that don't have a brain or even a neural network, it has to go somewhere else or is body-wide.
Where's the thought?
So he's asking, where is the thought? Okay, so I'm looking at Eric right now. And my question, Eric, would be, where is your soul? Hey, Mark, thank you for the donation. The soul animates the body. The person drives the car. Not having a car doesn't mean you can't have a person. Still don't believe in souls. Well, I agree with that, Mark. That's true. But if you look at his definition, it almost implies that if you don't have a body, then how can you have a soul? Like if you never, ever, ever have a car, can you ever have a car driver? I think not.
Where is a thought?
But yeah, where is the soul exactly? I don't think a Christian can answer that question. I think, scientists like Sam Harris would say that self, that ego, it feels like it's right behind the eyes. So Christians, is that where you think your soul is? Is it right behind the eyes, inside your head? Is it in your fingertip? Can you sit here as a human being and your soul be next to you? I actually think some Christians say yes to that, an out of body experience. So your soul can actually go from inside you somewhere, outside of you, and back inside you, maybe into someone else. But when it's inside this body, because according to the definition, it animates the body, does it have to be inside the body? And if so, where?
As I said, the higher order thinking, what we would recognize as thoughts, is in the cerebral cortex, the 10% of our brain where our neurons are.
So you've said consciousness is it's a function, it's something the brain does. How can a function be true or false?
Yeah, this is an interesting way to phrase it. How can a function be true or false? So Aron's position, which is similar to mine, is that consciousness is a verb. A brain is a noun. So a brain is something, and what it does is consciousness. And Eric is trying to say, well, thoughts can be true or false. So can a function be true or false? And I would just turn that right back on Eric and say, can a soul be true or false? And maybe that's not the right analogy, but I think that's a sort of a silly question, right? Can a soul be true or false? And in the same way, maybe a better example is we eat food, goes down our esophagus, into our stomach, into our intestines. We can make true or false claims about where the food is, at what stage it is in the body, but is digestion true or false? No, it's a verb. It's something that the process, it's the process of what's happening.
What?
How can a function be true or false?
Does it function? Yes equals true.
No.
No equals false.
How can a function be true or false? So when I flush my toilet, that's a function, but that's not true or false.
Okay.
Aron's really annoyed. He was basically annoyed throughout this whole thing because I think even from the very beginning, he thought that the title of this whole thing was something different than it is. The title is, Does the Soul Exist? And I think Aron wanted something like, is there evidence the soul exists?
So how can a thought be a brain function? If a thought can be true or false, then it's a property of a thought to be true or false. It's not a property of a function to be true or false. If you're going to say a thought is something physical in the brain, it's going to...
Yeah, can your body be true or false? Now your soul contains consciousness and seems like inside the body. What I think Eric is trying to show here is that these are two separate things. A thought is different than the brain. And if they're different and the brain's physical, then maybe the thought's not physical. You wouldn't say maybe, you would say the thought isn't physical. But I think you can do the same thing with the soul. That the soul is maybe not purely immaterial, because it's obvious from his definition, soul is not the same as the body. A soul is not the same as the brain. And the soul is not even the same as consciousness according to his definition. So maybe there is a soul, immaterial soul, but maybe consciousness is not purely immaterial. Maybe it is joined at the hip with a body or something physical. But a Christian like Eric would never want to go there because he believes that spirits without bodies. Evidence. Now, if Eric's listening, he's going to be upset. But Eric, hear me out. This is to help you. When you're talking to a guy like Aron Ra, evidence equals empirical evidence. I think at least 99.9% of the time. When you say the word evidence, he's thinking empirical. And you know Aron Ra enough to know that that's the case. He's that type of guy. And so when you are using philosophical arguments or deductive arguments, for a guy like Eric, for Aron, he's going to go to that. He's like, that ain't no evidence. That's you sitting on a couch with a cigar in your mouth thinking about, what can I imagine today?
And be wrong. That means what?
That it's not a physical state or function.
Okay, so you flush your toilet. How is flushing your toilet true or false?
Well, that's my point. It's not.
Yeah, that's his point. It's not. He actually froze up at this point, I think. So I'm going to fast forward it to his next tough question here.
Argument, which was evidence. Deductive logic is evidence, showing that.
Yeah, see, he just said it. Deductive arguments are evidence.
That if the mind is reducible or identical to the brain, they're going to share the same properties. If they don't share the same properties, they're not the same thing.
Yeah, this is his point. If they don't share the same properties, they're not the same thing. So a thought, consciousness is different than the brain, something physical. But you can just flip that right back on him and say something like, if the mind is reducible or identical to the soul, they're going to share the same properties. If they're not going to share the same properties, they're not the same thing. But look at his definition. It doesn't seem like consciousness is exactly the same thing as the soul. Because number one, the soul, it seems like consciousness is a subset of the soul. And it really looks like he needs a body.
For you to say that consciousness is physical, you're going to have to show me that all the properties of the mind are identical or reducible to something physical like the brain.
Yeah, and I can flip that right back. If consciousness is immaterial, you're going to have to show me, Eric, that all the properties of the mind are identical or reducible to something immaterial like the soul. You got to show me. Show me that. You got to demonstrate that. You're asking Aron Ra to demonstrate it, that it's purely physical. Show me, demonstrate that it's purely immaterial. I don't think you can. In fact, I think your own definition of soul shows that they're linked. So it would be kind of fun to actually just grant him that the soul exists, but say, yeah, the soul exists, but it's 100% dependent on the body. And just, that would be a good debate topic.
I haven't heard that. Can you do that? I'm sorry?
But I think I already did that.
How'd you do that?
When you asked me what a pain is, and I explained what a pain is, and you said I didn't explain what a pain is, even though I did, and then you said that your pain cannot be true or false, which means flushing the toilet cannot be true or false. I don't understand what you're trying to do.
Well, yeah. I can see that. No, so what you described was what someone does when they're in pain, but describing pain behavior did not describe pain. There was an intrinsic qualia to pain itself.
Yeah, and I think I understand what Eric is saying here. And to be fair to Aron Ra, he had problems earlier on in this stream because of dogs was in his office. Why did you have your dogs in the office? But I think I understand that he's saying pain is a quality, it's an experience, it's a first person something that you can't really pinpoint, but you can do that with something physical. And I would just flip that right around and say, isn't that the same with the soul? Like, where is pain in the soul? Like, can you point to it in the soul? No. So in the same way, you can't really say, where is pain in the soul? You can't really even say, where is the pain in the brain? Oh, that rhymes.
Right. It's how we perceive the damage being done through our sensory network. That is
because a lot of Christians like Eric will say the pain will manifest itself in the brain, and you can hook up machines and see it. But what you experience, you can't do that. Hey, Scott Dew, thank you for the donation. Doug, are you trying to be the Art Bell of counterapologetics? Anyway, interesting topic. Art Bell, who's that again? Now you got me curious. That name sounds familiar. Oh. No, I'm not trying to be anybody. I'm just being me.
Is the answer. That is what a pain is. It's the indication of damage that we perceive through our receptors. Literally, that's what it is.
It's damage. Okay, it's perceived damage. So perception, is that something physical?
Yes.
Yeah, is perception something immaterial? And I think Eric would say yes to that. But if if perception is immaterial, then I think, Eric, you need to fix your definition of soul, because it seems like you need a body in order for the soul to equal that. It seems like it's one of those things that has to be there.
How does a brain function perceive?
How does a soul function perceive? Explain to me, Eric, the mechanism by which a soul perceives. How does that work? How does it happen? The thing is, and this is what I think is going to bother some Christians, is we know so much more about how the brain works than I think Christians would admit how the soul works to generate this thing called consciousness. Right? That's fair. We can come up with we can actually look at neurons and see synapses firing and that sort of thing. But can you see a soul fire something into a body to animate it? Like, is that detectable, that soul part? No, I don't. I think they would say, well, no, of course not, Doug. It's immaterial. We can't detect it. So don't we know more then? Like, these are really tough questions Eric's asking, but it seems like we can still answer them better from, I'll just say, the naturalist point of view than we can the theist point of view. Because I don't think Eric has any idea how a soul actually causes perception. He would say it just does. Or he would say, like I had in that one short video, God just does it, or made it so it works.
Well, I'm not a neurologist. I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly how these neurons affect, or the network of sensory receptors and how they're interconnected. But I know that if you damage something in the body, then the body does send the signal, and the signal is received and interpreted as pain. Pain is the perception of that damage being done. And yes, it's physical.
He froze here. Now, at first, when I watched this the first time, I thought Eric was doing some debate strategy by just pausing, because I do that sometimes. And I thought, oh, this is cool, Eric. Yeah, right on, Eric. You're using the pause to your benefit. But no, he was just, his internet went down. Pay your internet bill, Eric. Or upgrade it.
If I can get him back. So we can continue there and progress forward.
All right. Okay. So, like I was saying, you described pain behavior, didn't describe pain. We're talking about thoughts. Now, if a property of being a thought can be true or false, but no part or function of my brain is true or false, and that alone would show that they're not the same thing.
Yeah, and I would flip that right back. Now, if the property of being a thought can be true or false, but no part or function of the soul can be true or false, that alone would show that they're not the same thing. That shows, using Eric's logic, that the soul and consciousness is not the same thing. Now, maybe he's happy with that. Maybe he's content with that. It looks like, according to his definition, maybe he would say, grant that the soul is actually not the same thing as consciousness. It's consciousness plus a body. But I don't think he wants to go there either, because he believes you can have conscious or a soul without a body.
Now, do you agree or disagree?
Okay, I'm going to fast forward it here to another question he asked. By the way, I want to show the end too. Like, he pulled a PineCreek at the end. Remember how I treated Randall Rouser the second time? Totally disrespectful. He did the same thing to Aron Ra. Maybe he stole that from me. Maybe, I don't know if he did it on purpose. 50-54. Oops. Perfect.
Will, because every action, thought, and belief is causally determined by prior external factors beyond yourself. So you can't have free will if there's no soul.
You can't have free will if there's a soul, because every action, thought, and belief is causally determined by prior external factors beyond yourself, namely God. You wouldn't exist if God didn't exist, Eric, according to your worldview, internal critique. So you can't have free will. Everything that God has done prior to your decisions has been decreed by him, has been foreknown by him, and whatever he knows will happen, because if it doesn't happen, then he knew wrong, and God's never wrong. A lot of Christians don't like that argument, but it is a problem in philosophy. So I would just flip that right back on him and saying that if a God exists, you just think you have free will, but really you don't. It's an illusion. You might have choices, but free will in the strong sense, the ability to have done otherwise, no. If, in fact, I could even make it even stronger and say something like, if there is free will that you could have done otherwise, then God's not sovereign. And he doesn't have the earth in the palm of his hand. It's like, no, it's in your hand now. You get to choose. In fact, there's a problem with free will and grace. If you have free will, the ability to have done otherwise, then you have the power to determine your eternal destiny, not God. You control that. You're the God of your own life by choosing Christ as your Savior.
Which means that you're very believed to be an atheist, and so you're very believed to be an atheist, and so So your very belief to be an atheist and your belief to not believe in the soul was not a free decision that you came to make. It wasn't even a rational decision because there was no free will. So your beliefs are no more rational than the religious person on the street, saying that the world is flat and that the earth is young.
Yeah, so your belief, Eric, to be a Christian, and your belief in the soul was not a free decision that you came to make. It wasn't even a rational decision, Eric, because there is no free will. So your beliefs are no more rational than a person saying the world is flat. I can just flip that right back on you. And the thing is, this whole idea of free will, like it's a tough one as well. What does it mean actually to have free will? I think Christians like Eric would have to say that there's no reasons for making a decision. Like if there's reasons behind your free will decision, then isn't that a causing an effect, i.e. determinism? And since it's so complicated, in fact, with the whole free will thing, I just pretend I'm a Calvinist, a hardcore hyper-Calvinist, and say, look, we don't know the mind of God, so we act like we're free. There's so many inputs, so many causes that causes different effects. It's very complex, very complicated. You have to be omniscient to really understand where everything's going to go. And so from our perspective, from the human perspective, we just we act like we're free because we don't know all the factors that play decisions. But if we had the mind of God, if we knew Eric like God knows Eric, we would know what he would decide before he even decided it. Wouldn't we? Or is there this something that there's a decision, a free will decision that pops out of nothingness? Does that happen? Maybe some Christians would say that, but if they say that, then free will becomes like random chance and arbitrary. It's just like, oh, yeah, I have really good reasons to eat steak tonight, but I'm going to choose shrimp. Why? I don't know. It's just a desire that popped out of nothing. It's a miracle. Oh, no, you wouldn't eat shrimp. Well, not as an Old Testament believer.
Except that I have reasons to hold the position that I do, which is why I...
Oh, Ben Roberts says, PineCreek born from T-Jump. My channel is a little older than T-Jump's. He was borrowing from me. No, I love T-Jump, and this is, I think this is exactly how you do it. I've been doing this for years, not on philosophical arguments, but using sort of like the outsider test for faith, street epistemology type methods for a long time now. And when I first saw T-Jump, I think when I first made, in fact, it was one of the subscribers. Was it Darkin? I don't know, Darkin, if you're here. But one of my subscribers said, hey, check out T-Jump. So I did. And I saw exactly what he was doing. And I said, hey, I liked him because it was similar to what I was doing. Hey, thank you, Stupid Whore Energy, for the donation. Shrimp is high in cholesterol. Shame on you. Yeah, but it is so tasty.
hold the position that I...
Okay, but yeah, I'd rather have T-Jump deal with stuff like this. If I was to give any advice to T-Jump, though, is back off on the claims and just ask nothing but questions. I know some Christians hate that, and he does do that sometimes, but not enough in my opinion. Especially on topics like this, because it's just so difficult and unknown.
That's to show the non-identity of so there were 2 points I made. Consciousness is not physical, and I am more than a brain and body.
Okay, he just said he's more than a brain and body. However, can you have Eric Hernandez without a brain and body? And I think he would say yes. Eric Hernandez can exist without a brain and body. But yet his soul definition seems like it has to have a body, because that's what consciousness is. A soul contains consciousness and animates the body. If there's nothing to animate, do you really have consciousness and a soul? So this is something I think, Eric, you might have to consider changing this definition or tinker with it a little bit. I don't know even how I could help you with this. Because we don't even know how to define immaterial, right? That's one big, huge problem. But Because really, when Christians define immaterial, they just say not material. But how would you define or give the idea of immaterial in the positive sense instead of the negation? I don't know how you would do that. That contains consciousness. And maybe if you say that sometimes contains consciousness within a body, but that seems so wishy-washy, doesn't it? Yeah, I don't know. You figure it out, Eric.
I'm assuming you disagree with both of those. Is that correct?
Of course.
Okay, so if consciousness is physical, you're going to have to demonstrate that every mental state and property is identical to every physical state and property.
If consciousness is immaterial, Eric, you're going to have to demonstrate that every mental state and property is identical to the soul. See what I did there? I just flipped it right back on you. Is every mental state, is every act of consciousness identical to the soul? I think according to your definition, you should say no. It's not identical to the soul. But I don't know. Maybe you would say yes to that.
But if I can show, which I have, that there are mental states and properties that are not reducible or identical to any physical states and properties, it would show that consciousness is not physical. If
maybe dogs were making noise in the background, but I didn't catch that part. When did you do that?
So there are things true of, okay, you have mental states and properties that are not identical to anything physical.
Are there mental states and properties that are not identical to anything immaterial?
So something physical is something that can be described purely in the language of chemistry and physics. You cannot do that with conscious states.
You mean like
when you look
an immaterial substance?
So that's even another thing that's odd. It's almost embarrassing, because for you to say that is for you to show that you don't know even the history of that term substance. It was first used by philosophers.
Oh, yeah. And to me, this is funny. It's like, oh, so embarrassing. Why don't you value philosophy like I do, Aron Ra? It's like, you don't even know what this word means? But like, my advice is for people like Aron Ra is cozy up to that ignorance. I mean, for the purpose of the debate, say, sorry, Eric, but can you please educate me? I will kneel down at your feet, and you be the teacher and I'll be the student. And then just ask questions like Socrates did. And I think he'll find that by asking questions, he'll be on the back foot. And there's a lot of stuff he'll just say, I don't know, God just does it. I think that's basically what he's going to be left saying.
And then science got a hold of it later. So a substance is not something necessarily tied to science and something physical. It has a rich history of it. And for something to be a substance, there's a certain views of substance, like identity through change, indivisibility, things of that nature.
Okay, and immaterial means?
Not physical. No.
Yeah, immaterial means not physical. But what's the positive? Like, how would you define immaterial without the im part, or that idea of, like, everything in our experience seems to be physical? What does it even mean to exist without matter? That's a tough one for Christians to answer.
Not material?
So, not a non-physical substance. So immaterial means non-physical. What does non-physical mean?
Yeah, something that's going to take more than the language of chemistry and physics to describe.
Something that takes more than the language of chemistry and physics to describe. Maybe like the inner testimony of the Holy Spirit. Would that describe it? What methods do we use to detect this spirit? Is it like one of those priests with the cross, like garlic or something? And if something changes, like what? The thing is, there's a lot of people on this planet who actually desire to believe some of these things, but they can't bring themselves to do it because there's no way to falsify it. There's no way to show that it's true. It's just like, I've said this before, but I think this would be a wonderful way to help Eric and Christians. But unfortunately, we don't have the technology yet. But if we could kill people and bring them back to life 100% of the time, like after a full week, and then have reproducible results. So we get 1,000 people and say, okay, we're going to kill all of you for 7 days. See up there's a random number generator. We'll have 3 digits. During those 7 days, if you have control of your faculties, which I think, if you're conscious, you should fly up there, because you don't need a body. Fly up there and then come back down and tell us what those 3 numbers are. Now, I tell you, if that happened, PineCreek would say, you know what? I think consciousness is immaterial. Doesn't need a body at all. That body was dead. And yet 1,000 people came back and each had those numbers right. I think even guys like Eric Hernandez would say, yeah, that is way more powerful evidence than deductive logic or philosophical arguments. He would say, amen, hell. See, I told you, all you atheists out there, I told you that consciousness was immaterial and you didn't believe us. But now look, we got the scientific evidence to prove it. Like, they would be ecstatic if that happened. And they should be.
Okay.
Having properties beyond the physical.
Because so far as I know, nobody's ever defined what the hell this is. I mean, it's always something nebulous that you can never touch it. But my understanding is that a soul...
Why would you be able to touch something non-physical?
Right. I wouldn't assume such a thing. I wish you wouldn't imply that I had.
Well, technically, if the soul animates the body, you can touch the soul. Because the soul equals an immaterial substance that contains consciousness and animates the body. So if we can touch the body, aren't we touching at least part of the soul?
You just said it's something you can't touch. Well, of course.
Right. Of course. So I obviously didn't assume you could touch it. But your argument with the soul is that we have this thing that can't touch the physical universe, or maybe it can touch the physical universe. I don't know, because we never got a definition from you. So somehow this mystical, ghostly, whatever it is that remains undefined, exists inside us and apparently drives our bodies around. I mean, are we on the right track? I mean, do we need to define what a soul is before we argue about it?
Well, I did. I mean, I'm almost tempted to ask if you were paying attention to my opening. I did define what a soul was.
Yeah, he did. And I got it up on the screen here. And that definition is so important. That's why I'm leaving it up here.
They even had a slide
you
for
said
it.
a material substance.
That contains consciousness and animates the body.
Yeah. So basically, it's the man behind.
But the thing is that Eric doesn't quite believe his own definition, because he believes, I think, that a soul doesn't have to animate a body. A soul can float around. I think he really believes that. In fact, I think he really believes that souls or spirits were in a man and left the man, no body, and goes into a different body, namely pigs. So at least for a short amount of time, yeah, you don't need a body. And it doesn't even have to be a human body.
Behind the curtain, pushing buttons and throwing levers, rather than the complex functions of the brain and biochemistry. It always has to boil down to man behind the curtain in some way. But
because a brain function.
You really just.
In my opinion, Aron Ra's best question is coming up, I think, in the next 10 seconds, 11 seconds.
A brain function.
You're pushing the argument back because what causes the soul to be able to think? If you
It's right there. What causes the soul to be able to think? Great question.
Count that the brain can think, even when we can show how the brain actually does think, then you want to say that the soul is doing the thinking for the brain. Well, how does the soul do the thinking?
Now, watch Eric Hernandez's response. The question is, how does the soul do the thinking?
Okay, hold on. So you're saying that the brain can think. So
And Eric is saying that the soul can think. Well, how? How does the soul think? Well, it just does, Doug. Don't be stupid. The soul is the thinking thing that thinks. So it just does. And I can say, the brain is the thinking thing that thinks. It just does.
I have no idea how we would show the brain thinks.
I would have no idea how you would show that the soul thinks. Do you have any ideas, Eric, how you show that?
So this gets into already something I said about first-person private access. I know it was a lot to go through, but
Okay. So the main point of all this is Eric saying, look, consciousness cannot be purely physical because it's not identical. A thought is not identical to the physical brain. And I think we can say that non-identity shows that consciousness doesn't exist purely as immaterial because of this definition of the soul. So I would grant them that the soul is immaterial for the sake of argument and just battle on that whole thing that it seems like it's purely dependent on the body. And his own definition kind of admits that. And Aron at some point talks about how souls, like, what's that movie? Is it Ghost? Yeah, the movie Ghost, where souls go out of one person into another person. I think Eric thinks that the movie Ghost with Whoopi Goldberg is a documentary. That it actually happens. Okay, but I wanted to show you this here at the end. And I don't know if Eric's throat got sore, but where is it here? Let's see if I can find it. Oh yeah, this is funny to me.
Obviously, she can't.
He's sucking a sucker.
And didn't. Knowledge is demonstrable with measurable accuracy. If you can't verify the accuracy of your claims to any degree at all by any means whatsoever, then you cannot actually know what you merely believe. And then as Helen Keller died an atheist, well, then obviously she didn't know there was a God.
Eric?
But everybody knows there's a God, Aron. Come on. You're just suppressing the truth in unrighteousness.
in order to have knowledge, you have to be able to demonstrate.
For the reasons that I just said, yes.
So can you know things that you can't demonstrate?
How would you know that you know them?
That's also a great question by Eric. Can you know things? How did he phrase it?
You can't demonstrate?
Yes.
So can you know things that you can't demonstrate?
Can you know things that you can't demonstrate? And I would say yes to that. But then you're talking about some really basic stuff, like properly basic beliefs, that sort of thing. You know, like knowing that there are other minds, or that your mom's your mom, or that you exist, stuff like that. And can you demonstrate that we're not in the Matrix right now? Of course not.
How would you know that you know them? If there's no way
I don't
to
think
test
you have
it.
to know that you. No, I don't think you have to
You would
know
think so.
that you know things in order to know them.
But you have to be able to demonstrate it, because you really do. Because there are lots of times that we've thought we knew something, or thought it ended up we remembered it incorrectly, and then
Eric, if you ever watch this, you should have given an example here, like I did, of things that you can know without demonstrating it.
when you go to check the data, no, it actually says it. I'll show you right here where it actually says something slightly different than what I thought. That happens. I forget. There's the Mandela effect. I can't remember what they call it, but where you remember something incorrectly, and then it goes out through the culture. Everybody remembers it incorrectly, but that's what it is. So you think you know it, and you don't know it. You need to be able to verify it.
So I don't think you need to be able to know something before you can know it. That's a Methodist point of view in epistemology. I'm a particularist, and I think when you go off there, you lead into an infinite regress, because in order to know something, you have to show how you know it. But then,
Yeah, infinite regresses. This gets to foundationalism, and you got to have a starting point, and blah 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 blah. But yeah, okay. So that's all I want to play here. But Eric, yeah, fix your definition of soul. I think to say that it contains consciousness and animates the body puts you at risk of questions like, well, if there is absolutely no body, can you still have a soul? So you got to tinker with that. And by saying contains consciousness, you're intimating, you're hinting at that consciousness and the soul are kind of two different things. And if they're two different things, then maybe consciousness is not purely immaterial, because you're saying the soul is immaterial, but maybe consciousness is partly immaterial and partly immaterial and partly material. In other words, it's not purely immaterial. I think that's the downfall of your definition. I don't know. What did you guys think? Let your Holy Spirit out. If it's anchored to the body, it can't be fully immaterial. Right, Sovereign Soul, that's my point. Yeah, I said it was a bit of a shit show. If you watch the whole thing, I don't think Aron Ra is purposely trying to be difficult. I think he just doesn't care about the stuff Eric cares about, philosophy, for example. And he's coming from a completely different worldview. So, Eric, if you want to evangelize to guys like Aron Ra, if you want him to have a personal relationship with Jesus someday, you got to figure out different ways to communicate. Sidani? No, I haven't seen those. I saw your message, though, that I should. You're welcome, Graham Cracker. Yeah, that's a good question, Mike Ortez. What about the mentally disabled? Well, and I think the whole question about animals is a good one. Because I don't think Christians can have any way to demonstrate where a soul starts, where it ends. Like, there's certain proteins in the body, are they conscious when they're building muscle tissue? Or are they basically inanimate tools? Who won? Who won? It was such... I don't know. Okay, I'm trying to put my Christian hat on. I think the typical Christian watching this, fan of Eric, is going to say that Aron Ra was a dunce. How dare you not even know these terms and words and... If you want to blow your brain with this whole concept of consciousness, watch HBO Westworld. Westworld defines consciousness as the ability to suffer and remember. To remember and to experience and remember sufferings. Who do you consider to be an apologist worth watching? Oh, I think they're all worth watching, but for different reasons. Some sheer entertainment. You know, sometimes you see a car accident, you know you shouldn't look, but then you just have to look. Some apologists are like that. It's just a train wreck. It's garbage. It's it's disgusting, but you just gotta look. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm sick. A soul, in my opinion, starts when the body starts. See, that's exactly what I said Denny. It seems like the soul is very dependent, if not completely dependent, on the body, on a sperm and an egg. Yeah, dogs. I just bought a purebred German Shepherd. It is incredibly smart. It has consciousness, I think. Aron is very aggressive, but Eric is very passive-aggressive, which I find far more infuriating. But what's interesting is one more round of music. What's interesting about Aron Ra and Matt Dillahunty is Christians like Eric Hernandez realize that they're effective. And so I think they feel like they need to show their fans, mostly boys, fanboys between the ages of 18 and 22, that they're not stupid for believing what they believe. And so they're passionate against those guys. Yeah, you're right, Vinzus86. This is why I shy away from debates, because give the win to your opponent, and then let's have a discussion. Yes, Matt Metro, Adam and Eve were originally vegetarians. In fact, that reminds me of, you know how a lot of Christians say that the traditional view of marriage is between one man and one woman, because that's the way it was in the Garden of Eden. Well, the way it was in the Garden of Eden was eating fruits and vegetables. So if you believe in traditional marriage for that reason, in Genesis 1 or 2, then you should be a vegetarian or a vegan. But then later on, God said you can eat meat. Why? Because the authors of the Old Testament scriptures wanted to eat meat. So God said it's okay then. My apologies to Eric Hernandez. He was scheduled to come on, but we ran out of time. Have a good what's the rest of your weekend. Take care, guys. Of your weekend.